Welcome to Security Fundamentals. In this chapter, we're going to look at the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. We're going to look at security definitions, TCP/IP basics, malware, network devices and sniffers, wireless standards, and database basics. As you can see in this picture, we have come a long way. We're looking at the growth of environments and security. I'm sure some of you are looking at this picture and going, what am I looking at? Lower left, I see a network card, but I don't recognize the connectors. That's rather odd looking. What's coax? Maybe the upper left, you're looking at that going, wow, that looks, I haven't seen computers that big before. Well, basically mainframes. Computers used to take up large rooms. So quite a few of the systems on this screen are actually, quite aged. We have the Apple II in the lower middle, and essentially our computer systems have grown. We've come a great, just a long way since they've begun, and we've evolved to just great computers and small sizes, and we've basically, it seems like everybody's got a computer these days in the home environment, which maybe we could not have imagined this back in some of these initial time periods. Can't even conceive that. But computers are all around us, and we're connected with Facebook and just a variety of social media. And with that, I think security has become more and more important. We have online banking now. We can potentially look at our health records online. There's so much we can do online. And so our companies have had to become more and more secure. And obviously the hackers have evolved along with us. And hackers have learned, and even young children have learned, how to, use computers and be maybe far more proficient than we ever thought we would be at such a young age. So since there's hackers around and hackers are wishing to get into our networks, we have to go to great lengths to actually secure our networks, because these days computer systems are just all interconnected through the internet. And there's great concern over our information getting out to those that we don't trust. Now, when you think about security, the core of all security classes you hear is CIA. Confidentiality, integrity, availability. With confidentiality, think of encryption, keeping information where it's not readable by someone we wish not to read the information. Maybe it's our information at a hospital or a bank, and we do not want some stranger reading our confidential information, so we encrypt the information, which basically puts it in a format that looks almost like a foreign language. It's basically all rearranged and it looks like gibberish. And only people that could read the information would be those with the decryption keys, the appropriate people. So our goal is to keep the information confidential, or maybe we even keep it confidential through permissions. If you don't have the correct permissions to look at it, you cannot see it either and read it. So confidentiality, you're keeping the information for those that should not set their eyes on your information and make sense of it. So it's more, can they read it? Can they understand what they're looking at? Integrity, that gets into, can they manipulate the data? Unauthorized people. Of course, we want the authorized people to be able to manipulate the data, make changes to the data, because they are authorized to do so. But with this, only the approved persons and processes should be able to make these changes, not somebody else. And computer security, as you'll see in the cryptography chapter, hashing as in MD5 or SHA-1, examples like that, hashing is done on data to verify integrity. It does not stop the information from being manipulated by an unapproved person, but yet it lets us know it has occurred, so we know not to trust that data. So again, hashing algorithms like MD5 and SHA-1 and so on are usually related to integrity. Availability. With availability, we want our information to always be there, remain available when and where we need it. We would not tolerate, if we're working with a particular bank, online banking and say, oh, we're available some of the time, not other times. I mean, it would be unacceptable. If we're going to put our money in the bank in days like these where we expect to be able to purchase items when we want to, any time of the night or day, and we want to be able to use our debit card and tie it into our banking, we would not want to have to tolerate, well, we're unavailable from 12 to 6 a.m. That would just be unacceptable. So we want constant availability. And we don't want hackers to be able to affect that availability so we cannot get into our banking or get into our health records or whatever it may be. So the CIA confidentiality, integrity, availability are highly critical. So a little bit more on this. Confidentiality, secrecy, sensitivity, privacy, prevents unauthorized disclosure of data, protects sensitive data and processes from things like shoulder surfing is where I'm actually, if I was a bad guy, looking over your shoulder, watching what you type, or looking at what you have on your computer screen. And we would want to, do some preventative measures to keep that from happening, possibly pay attention to who's near you. Plus, you could have some sort of, screen filter on there. Social engineering. People can try to manipulate another person by being friendly or some sort of generally manipulation or intimidation, or maybe it's through email to try to get information out of them that they should have not given up. So we're always trying to keep information confidential, but really encryption is super popular for this. You see confidentiality through encryption with virtual private networks, maybe even internally to protect against sniffing of the information and being able to read it. Remember the integrity? We're trying to keep our information accurate and complete. We want to prevent as much as possible unauthorized modifications. If we happen to be looking at hospital records, only people that are supposed to be modifying the hospital records should have that access. If a hacker is able to go in and manipulate our health records, that's a bad thing, because they could say that we have cancer when we don't have cancer, say we have a disease when we don't have a disease, or whatever it may be. So we wish to protect our information from being changed by those that are not authorized to change it. Any sort of general manipulation. It could even be changing your security log. Availability. This is not really manipulating the data. It's making the computer system unavailable. Unusability. Timelessness. It basically disrupts your service. If you happen to be a company like Amazon, and hackers were able to disrupt Amazon, it would obviously affect their reputation. It would affect their sales. They would lose money and maybe those hours that they were offline, which is hard to imagine, but you could pretend. And all this disruption is very negative to that business. We hope for, uptime that never stops. I mean, we're always available. What could cause a lack of availability? I mean, it can be man-made, technical, or even a natural disaster. And of course, that's where disaster recovery comes in on the disaster part, like a tornado or a hurricane, something like that. It could be that a device failed, and we hopefully have fault tolerance. So if this device fails, another device takes over, whether it be a switch, a router, or maybe clustered servers. Or it could be hackers just trying to bring you down because you're the competitor. And we call this a denial of service. Approaching security holistically. It's really everybody's involved in forcing and guiding a culture of security. We have physical security, can't forget that. Physical security is a big part. If people cannot get into the rooms where the equipment exists, there is, obviously much better likelihood of keeping secure. I mean, because when it comes to physical security, if you cannot ensure the physical security, much can be done to computers when people can just walk in the room with them and unplug them or, shut them down, things like that. All right, so we're one to behave and be secure. Operational security, it's all facets of security. It all goes together. These definitions we will see a few times through here. We have vulnerability, weakness in a mechanism that can mean threatens confidentiality, integrity, or availability of that computer system or asset. And a lot of times we have vulnerabilities because we lack some sort of countermeasure or control. Perhaps we needed to have the appropriate patching or the right antivirus updated. Okay. Threat: someone uncovering a vulnerability and exploiting it. Some hacker, for example, found out that there was a vulnerability in Windows 2000 or Windows 2003 server, and they wanted to exploit it because they found that they could get into the system through that vulnerability. Risk: probability of that threat becoming real and the corresponding potential damages. So we could have a vulnerability, but as far as the risk, it's kind of like how likely it is going to happen. You could have the same vulnerability in two different physical environments, and one environment may have lots of people around, maybe at a college, and maybe another environment is somewhere where there's quite a bit of a distance between the buildings, and perhaps the threat level is much higher in the college environments because there's people are so close to the systems, and maybe they're the age group that they're more interested in hacking, perhaps, that your overall risk could be more likely because that threat could become real more likely. Again, the probability increases. Exposure: when the threat agent, that could be the hacker, exploits the vulnerability. Countermeasure: you put something in place to try to mitigate or reduce the potential losses. We put antivirus on computers as a countermeasure, as a control, to try to reduce the likelihood of being harmed by a virus or a Trojan horse, some program like that, some form of malware. And as far as the definitions relationship, you can kind of see that they basically all tie together. And when they talk about safeguards, we are trying to put a countermeasure in place. And we can't really avoid every vulnerability we're going to have, but we do try to do vulnerability assessments and try to see what we have as far as vulnerabilities go, and we try to assess what the threats are and see what we can do about it, as long as it's cost effective, as we will see later. Next section, TCP/IP basics. First thing we do in TCP/IP, this is a very popular command where you actually use the command ping followed by an IP address. And what it's meant to do is you basically let you know if we have connectivity. So basic network connectivity can be tested using this. You would ping a live computer, a live host. So it sends out an ICMP, Internet Control Message Protocol, echo request packet, and if that IP address is up and running, then you will get a message back. An ICMP echo reply will be received. Now, you normally would get a reply back if they exist and everything is working correctly. These days, sometimes when we do pings, the reason they may fail may be because of a firewall, some sort of blocking that they're doing, and that's getting to be pretty common. Now, this is an OSI model, and you can see just kind of a glance of it, and you see it is a 7-layer model, and all they're trying to do here is show how we can kind of correlate some of the different protocols to some different models. You hear the DoD model, Department of Defense model, sometimes you hear TCP/IP model, but here they have the DoD model, which is basically a 4-layer model that maps beautifully to the OSI model. I prefer to stay with the OSI model because it's more granular, and it actually breaks it down into 7 layers instead of taking like application maps to session, presentation, application. Of course, you can see transport is host to host, network is internet, and data link and physical is network access. So it's the same thing, it's just 2 perspectives of 4 layers or 7 layers. And you can see some of the protocols within TCP/IP that correlate and what layer they correlate to. The ones that sound like applications, like HTTP, Simple Network Management Protocol, FTP, SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, and so on, you kind of map those more to the application layer, and you can see the port numbers on the slide. And when people use firewalls, they many times need the port number to do the firewalling or the filtering. The TCP and UDP are at the transport layer, also known as host-to-host layer. At the network layer, you can actually see the internet protocol. You can see the ICMP, which ping needs, the ping command requires ICMP. If it's to get a reply back, it is like a messaging type protocol. And our address resolution protocol always been nice for, resolving an IP to MAC address, which goes down into the data link layer. And of course, your network devices, you think of those as physical and data link for the most part. With TCP/IP, you will see that everything seems to go off of ports. There's like these port numbers. So internet sites list port numbers and their associated applications, and I'd say the iina.org is probably one of the best ones. So even if I went and did port numbers, I think it would just come up with it. Here it is. Some are more readable than others, but it shows you here that port numbers, there's actually ranges. We have system ports, 0 through 1023. Those are the most common. User ports, 1024 to 49,151. And there's also dynamic or private ports, 49,152, 65,535. And just to look at a few of the more common ones, FTP, you can see FTP data, port 20, FTP, port 21, secure shell. Some of this we will talk about later. That's been a nice replacement for Telnet and secure and FTP sessions. 23, Telnet. So these are pretty popular. There's your email, simple mail transfer protocol, port 25. Okay. So it kind of goes on and on. This is just one source of some of the ports. It's not a complete list that I'm looking at right here. But that's one of the more popular ones at iana.org because this shows you the well-known and registered port numbers. So it's kind of your main reference. Within the TCP/IP protocol suite, we have a three-way handshake. Whenever you see an application need to have reliability, it uses TCP. TCP actually goes and does something like this. It says, maybe I'm you, and you is talking to the server. So you says to the server, synchronize. Basically, I'd like to connect with you. Can you work with me? And then the server is going to come back and say, synchronize, acknowledge, send ACK. And with this, you're going to see that there's actually sequence numbers that are involved in the process too, so we can keep up with the conversations, and they're basically counting. And then the third phase is acknowledgement back. So the synchronization basically says, I'd like to connect to you and have a conversation. The acknowledgement says, yes, I'm willing. So you're seeing the synchronize go both directions with the acknowledgements going both directions. So send, SYNAC, ACK. If you're using a tool like Wireshark, you would actually see the three-way handshake. There's you talking to the server, server talking back to you, and a final acknowledgement. If you're using Wireshark, used to be Ethereal, and you really look at some of the TCP traffic, you could see these flags. They would be abbreviated. You'd mostly see synchronize and acknowledge, but you can find the others in there too. The SYN and the ACK, essentially, remember the synchronize, so synchronize sequence number basically starts up the conversation. The acknowledgement means, yes, I agree. Acknowledges the sequence numbers. You could also see some of these others. FIN, fit for finish. Final data bit used there in a four-step teardown sequence. Reset is where you basically close down the connection. Non-gracefully is the way I would put it, without going through the four-step teardown sequence. There's a sudden abort, a sudden stop of the connection. Push data bit is used to signify the data in this packet should be at the beginning of the queue of the data to be processed. In other words, put me first. It says this needs to go first. Urgent data is used to signify there's an urgent control character in the packet that needs to be processed immediately. When mostly you see the SYN and the ACK, those are really common. You can see FIN, you could see some resets, sometimes these.